It's time for FLA Law, brought to you by the personal injury attorneys of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril, and Noyes. This hour will be informative, along with taking your questions and comments. Now, here are your hosts for today's show.
Good evening. Good evening. This is Attorney Matthew Noyes, and I'm one of the partners at Perenich, Caulfield, Avril, and Noyes. And we are proud to sponsor and to run FLA Law on the radio. We are here every Tuesday from 5 until 6. It is a live legal call-in talk show. So if you have any questions regarding the law, give us a call. The call-in numbers is 727-441-3000. It's always better to call in the beginning of the show because sometimes we run out of time and we can't answer all our callers' questions. So again, we encourage you to call with any questions you have. We are a personal injury law firm, but we can tackle any questions, I think, regarding the law in Florida. And again, the number is 727-441-3000. I'm not here alone, though. Fortunately, I have a co-host, and it's my law partner, Brian Caulfield. Brian, thank you for coming again.
Always good to be here, Matt, and answer some questions.
Yeah, we're sorry we missed it last week. Last week it was Tuesday, and because of the storm, we had to run a tape show, but we are not taped today. We are live tonight, so please give us a call. And we really do wish that everybody is safe from the storm, and we wish them the very best as they continue to recover if there was any damage to them. So, again, we do extend our good wishes to any recovery needed for that hurricane. And it looks like there's another one coming in the Atlantic at least. So I'm not sure if it's coming our way or not. So you never know with those storms, right, Brian?
Well, they say it's going to be a pretty active season. So obviously fortunately, seems like we kind of avoided the worst of it, but it certainly gives you a glimpse as to how bad things could be when the actual storm's 100 miles offshore. And you have water, if you live on the water, as I do, water coming up halfway in your backyard towards your home. So that's a little frightening.
Yeah, and now with the changes in the homeowners' policies and the coverages, from a legal standpoint, it's even harder if you have a hurricane claim.
Yeah, certainly insurance has changed so dramatically over the years. I'm in the process myself of getting coverage and seeing the exclusions on the policy. When I became a lawyer over 30 years ago, we never had the types of exclusions that we have now. The bigger question is, what does the insurance policy cover? Because I looked today at a proposed policy and they had a dog bite exclusion. So if you own a dog and your dog bites someone, that's not going to be covered. They have, a sinkhole exclusion. And once again, if you have a sinkhole, you get no coverage. These are things that years ago were just assumed. There was never really any question about whether these possible events could be covered. And let's face it, if you're in Florida, probably the three biggest sources of you actually needing to make a homeowner's claim is, number one, if your dog bites someone.
Right.
Number two, if your house sinks due to a sinkhole. And then number three, you always have the issue where, someone could be on your property and have some type of a premises liability case, where something that you did or failed to do caused them to fall on your property. But now we're down to the point where really you only have the third thing covered. It's really amazing to watch the contraction of what coverage is available. But what's even more frightening is when you're sold the policy, you don't really have an appreciation for what you're buying.
No, that's true. There's a contraction of the rights and the protection, but there is no contraction of the amount of premium. That's for sure.
Yeah, and good luck trying to get a copy of the policy before you actually place the coverage. It's very difficult to get. So certainly the insurance market has changed dramatically. It's changed dramatically as it relates to our auto accident cases. You and I are both old enough to remember the good old days that when you bought your auto insurance here in Florida and you bought liability coverage to protect, other people in the unlikely event you caused the accident, you automatically had uninsured motorist coverage, what you and I consider to be the most important coverage. Then, years ago, the insurance companies lobbied the legislature to be able to sell policies where you reject the uninsured motorist coverage completely, which is the biggest mistake you could possibly make, because what that means is you're out there spending your hard-earned money to protect other people. You're buying bodily injury liability coverage, and all that does is protect other people in the unlikely event you're negligent and cause an accident. But when you reject uninsured motorist coverage, you're rejecting all the coverage that could come to benefit you and your family members and people inside of your vehicle when you get hit by a negligent driver.
And most drivers, I mean, if you're a good, safe driver, then your premium is reasonable for your liability coverage, and they have to be reasonable for your coverage as well.
Yeah, it's much less than your coverage.
But how many people would you estimate or guesstimate don't have any liability coverage or only $10,000 worth of liability coverage?
Yeah, that's a frightening statistic. I saw that as many as 40% of drivers in South Florida don't have bodily injury liability coverage.
Zero.
Yeah, zero. And I would say now you're probably upwards over 60% if you count in the no bodily injury liability coverage or a $10,000 policy. And let's face it, if you get into any kind of a severe accident, that $10,000 is spent, just a couple hours after you arrived at the emergency room.
Certainly.
In fact, it could be spent on the helicopter flight to a trauma center, depending on the severity of your injury. So that's probably the number one insurance mistake I think people make. And if the biggest take-home message of this show ought to be, take out your auto insurance policy. And I don't mean really the policy itself, just what's called the declaration sheet. It's that piece of paper you get once every 6 months that tells you what coverage you have and how much you're paying for it. And you've got to make sure that you have uninsured motorist coverage. If you do not, call your agent immediately and say you need to add that coverage. You don't have to wait till the policy period's over. You can do it right away, and you should. So
that's very important.
And if you don't have that, you have a question, you've got the bill, but you can't decipher or you're not really sure, you and I are happy to take a look at that. People can email us, Brian at USA Law, BRYAN at USALaw.com. I'll be happy to take a look at their policy and shoot you back an email that tells you what you need to do. And then Matt,
and Matt at USA Law as well. And it's the importance of being proactive. It doesn't do any good to look at your deck page
the day after
the crash. So I did forget to say, this is Matthew Noyes and this is Brian Caulfield. We're two partners at Perenich, Caulfield, Avril, and Noyes, the longest established or the oldest personal injury law firm in Tampa Bay. We started, our firm started in 1955, and we've been representing those injured ever since then. I also have us up on our Facebook page. I forgot to hit the live video till just recently, so now I have hit it. So if you have a question, but you don't really want to hear your voice on the radio, just go to our Facebook page. It's Perenich, Caulfield, Avril, and Noyes Injury Lawyers, and you can type in your comment or your question there, and we'll be happy to address it on air, and we won't give your name out. So again, that's Perenich, Caulfield, Avril, and Noyes Injury Lawyers. That's on Facebook. We are also on YouTube, on our firm's YouTube. But again, this is a live legal call-in show, so give us a call at 441-3000. Brian, we talked about us being personal injury attorneys, and some people say, hey, you're a personal injury attorney, but what does that mean? Can you tell our listeners, what encompasses personal injury, what type of cases we handle?
Sure, Matt. A personal injury really means you represent people. We don't represent corporations. We represent people that have been injured in accidents, and we represent family members of those that unfortunately have been killed as a result of either a car accident, medical negligence, construction law type accident. But we represent the people, and we represent people on a contingency fee basis, meaning if, when they come into our office, They don't have to bring their checkbook. They don't have to bring a retainer, and they don't get a bill from us throughout the entire time that we're working the case, like a monthly bill. We only get paid if and when we win the case.
Can you kind of explain the contingency? Why is it a contingency? Like if you hire a criminal lawyer, you pay an hourly fee or you pay a retainer. Why is personal injury different and a contingency fee?
Well, fortunately, contingency fees are really thought to be the keys to the courthouse.
Right.
Because, many folks aren't in a position where they can go pay some lawyer $250 or $500 an hour to bring a case for them, and then they have to pay that lawyer monthly when there's a bill, and they have to pay win, lose, or draw. A contingency fee means that you only pay if the contingency occurs. That is, you win the case and you make a recovery. So the lawyer is actually taking the risk that there's going to be a recovery made. And of course, we don't take every case that's called into us. We have to analyze the facts of the case and apply the facts of that case to what we know the law to be in Florida. And then we have to make a decision that we believe we can make a recovery in the case, in which case we'll accept the case, we'll advance all the costs necessary to bring the case. Things like the cost of filing a lawsuit is $600 or so to get it served. And then costs go way up from there. If you have to bring experts into the case, experts charge a lot of money, and experts are ones that you hire. Or even if you have to bring your own doctor to the courtroom, they don't come for free. So a lot of money needs to be advanced to them so that they can give the expert opinions that are required by law in order to perfect your personal injury case. And so we advance all that money. And then when the contingency occurs, that is when we win the case, our fee is a percentage of the recovery.
And the percentage is decided or calculated by the Florida Supreme Court.
Yes, absolutely.
And oftentimes when it's a personal injury case, it's people who get hurt and they may not be able to work. So you can't say, okay, you got hurt because of the negligence of somebody else. You can't earn a living because you're hurt, but pay a lawyer. So they continue
go into your savings
them.
account. And, a lot of people, let's face it, with inflation the way it's been, a lot of people don't have a tremendous amount of savings. And if they do, they don't want to have to risk it by paying a lawyer that gets paid win, lose, or draw.
Right.
So when you hire someone on a contingency fee, you can bet you're going to get that lawyer's best effort, because if they don't win the case, they're not going to get paid.
Right.
So they have every incentive, because they don't get paid till the end of the case, to make sure that there is a successful outcome of your case.
Right. Well, it does look like we do have a caller. Allison, thank you for holding, and thank you for listening to FLA Law on the radio. How can we help you?
I just have a question for you guys. I have a 15-year-old car. What kind of insurance should I have on that car?
That's a good question. I mean, the amount of coverage or the type of coverage you may need in terms of automobile insurance does kind of depend on the vehicle. So, Brian, can you help Allison out? What kind of coverage should she have and must she have on a car that's 15 years old?
Yeah, so let's talk about the coverage that you must have under Florida law. You must have personal injury protection coverage that pays up to $10,000 in medical bills or lost wages. That's coverage that's mandatory in Florida. And it's also mandatory for you to have $10,000 in property damage coverage to pay to other people if you're negligent and run into their vehicle. So believe it or not, that stops what the required coverages are.
That's quote unquote full coverage.
Full coverage, technically by law. But let's talk about the coverage that you really need. And we'll analyze that really in two different ways. You'd mentioned the age of your vehicle. And so where does that become relevant? Well, it becomes relevant in your collision coverage. In other words, when you have a 15-year-old vehicle, if it's not some special vehicle, then chances are the value of a 15-year-old typical American automobile is not very much. And so some people choose to go without collision coverage because they figure, well, my car's only worth $1,500 or $2,000 anyway. So, that's something that you have to make a decision, based upon how much you can afford to pay for yourself. If you end up having to replace the vehicle, you can take a larger deductible, and you'll find probably that the amounts required to buy that collision coverage are less. And the reason they're less is because ultimately they don't have to pay out as much. So that's really kind of an analysis of property damage coverage. You're going to have to determine what the deductible is you're willing to accept. And sometimes you might be willing to accept a higher deductible on a vehicle like that, or even go without buying any collision coverage and put the coverage towards what you really need, which is bodily injury liability coverage. That's so other people will have some money they can make a claim against you if unfortunately you're negligent and cause an accident.
And protect your assets.
Yeah, and protect your assets. And even more so important, buying bodily injury liability that's the key that opens the door to you being able to buy the most important coverage out there on your auto policy, and that's uninsured motorist coverage. It covers you if the other driver is uninsured, and just as important, if the other driver is underinsured, meaning they don't have enough coverage to fully pay for the injuries that they've caused to you. So I would tell you that as it relates to the injury portion of your case, or of what you're going to do insurance-wise, the age of the vehicle really doesn't make any difference as it relates to the coverages that protect you for injury.
Yeah.
It's just that when you get to the property damage side of things, you probably could afford to take a higher deductible, or even in some cases, depending on the age of your vehicle, you might decide, you know what, I'm not going to take any collision coverage. I'm going to take the chance that I won't get involved in a collision. Don't think it's a good idea, but it's an option. And if you use that savings and put it towards buying uninsured motorist coverage, that's probably a good idea.
Right. Allison, was that helpful?
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. And if you need a review of your auto insurance, please give our office a call at 727-796-8282, and we're happy to review the deck page. So again, Allison, thank you. That does free up a line. We do have open lines. So if you have a legal question, just give us a call. The number is 441-3000. And it does look like we have Jane on hold as well. Jane, thank you for listening to FLA Law on the radio. Brian Caulfield, Matt Noyes, we're here to help you with your question. What is your question?
Yes, I had just a quick question. A friend of mine was in a car accident, and she's having a hard time treating. It seems like her primary care doctors don't want to treat her. Who should she be going to?
That's a good question. We see that too often when there's an automobile accident, and our client says, "Okay, I'm going to go treat with my primary care doctor." Brian, what advice can you give Jane to what happens if your primary care doctor won't see you for an auto accident?
Yeah, Jane, that's unfortunate, and that seems to be growing in popularity, unfortunately. So, obviously you want to contact your primary care physician really first and ask the question of whether or not they see auto accident patients. And unfortunately, you are in the hands of a practice that won't. And some of the biggest primary care physician practices in the Bay Area will not see you if you tell them the reason you want to be seen are from injuries due to an auto accident. Well, then you have to find a doctor on your own, and your lawyer can help you do that, or you're just going to have to get onto Google and look for doctors that will take auto accident cases, because number one, you're going to have to access your auto insurance. So there are plenty of practices in all different types of medicine, whether it's orthopedic doctors, neurologists, chiropractors, that will in fact take you. And so you're just going to really have to get some guidance from an attorney who would know who those doctors are in your local geographical area. Or if you decide to go it alone, at least to get yourself started, you can get on Google and type in, auto accident treatment physicians and see what comes up near you, and then read about each practice and see what the Google reviews are from their patients. and make a decision that way. But I always recommend people go, if you've been involved in an auto accident that's not your fault, it's absolutely free to get a consultation from a personal injury lawyer. And so to me, these are the types of questions that a lawyer can help you with.
Right. That comes up afterwards, Jane, I hope that was helpful for you.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening. It does free up a line at 441-3000. We see that a lot, and a lot of the primary care doctors won't see them because of the billing. Sometimes they're not set up to do the billing for an auto case because it has to go through auto insurance instead of health insurance.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate because really typically the PIP auto insurance pays a higher amount than the health insurance who that physician's a member of. But there are still many physicians out there that believe that if they get involved in treating an auto accident patient, it's going to be a big hassle for them and they could end up being hailed into court. And so they simply do not want to do that. And they make the decision as a policy for their entire practice that they're not going to see auto accident patients.
Right.
Unfortunately.
And that brings us up into lawyers having to make referrals. I get so mad at insurance companies who say, oh, well, the lawyer referred so-and-so to Dr. Jones. Well, if I was somebody who needed a doctor, I would first go to another doctor and say, hey, who do you recommend? So I never understand. We lawyers understand what doctors handle automobile accident cases. So I always get a little frustrated when the insurance companies and even non-insurance company people, because the insurance companies have brainwashed society to think that it's wrong for a lawyer to recommend a doctor. I always get mad at them because the injured person is just trying to find the best person to get them better.
Well, and not only that, the person asking the question of who to go to has likely never been in that situation before. And so they have immediate access to talk to people like us who have handled literally thousands of these types of cases over my last 35 years as a lawyer. So certainly I'm going to be in a better position to know who will treat auto accident patients and who does a good job in not only treating the patient and caring for them and helping make them better, but what I have to be worried about as their lawyer is, are they going to give good documentation to help prove the injury case and be cooperative when it comes time to support their conclusion? Because a lot of times the insurance company don't agree with the treating physicians, as you well know, and they'll go out and hire a doctor called a compulsory medical examiner who will come in with an opinion that is 180 degrees opposite of the
we can often write those reports for them.
Yeah, you almost can just change the name. Sometimes they all end up with the same conclusion. This client didn't suffer a permanent injury from our accident. And the permanent injury within a reasonable degree of medical probability is the catchphrase here in Florida. That's the legal standard, or one of the legal standards, that you have to prove in order to cross Florida's no-fault threshold and be allowed to make claims for non-economic damages, like pain and suffering, mental anguish. Those are called non-economic damages. Economic damages you can make a claim for after a Florida auto accident without having to prove permanent injury. But when it comes to proving the things that really give a case value, which is non-economic damages, pain and suffering, mental anguish, inconvenience, all the things you traditionally associate with a personal injury case, you don't get those in Florida unless you cross Florida's threshold in one of four ways.
Right. And it's important for us to know which doctors, and it should be important for that person who gets hurt in a car accident, to know which doctors are willing to go to battle even in the courtroom. Just like there's lawyers who won't file lawsuits and they just want to settle cases, there's doctors who won't go to the courtroom. So it's important, as being a representative of the injured person, that we direct them to somebody who's going to battle for them in the courtroom just as much as battle for them in the doctor's office.
Yeah, I mean, the doctor doesn't do you a whole lot of good when the doctor, writes a report stating you have a permanent injury and then announces to your lawyer that, well, I'm not going to go to court to support my opinion. Even though the other doctor is saying my opinion is wrong, I'm not going. So
yeah, even if I disagree with them, I still don't want to go testify.
Yeah, so certainly that can become a problem in your case, and then you end up trying to give a fallback where, will you give a video deposition?
Right.
And that, unfortunately, the doctor coming against you, hired by the defense lawyer, is likely coming live as a witness. And so to have your treating physician just on a videotape, that to me is something I strive not to have.
Right. It's always a challenge when you go to a jury trial. We're going to talk a little bit about jury trials after our break. But it looks like it's a good time to take our break. Again, this is Matthew Noyes, and I'm here with my law partner, Brian Caulfield. We are partners at Perenich, Caulfield, Avril, and Noyes, and we are on FLA Law on the radio. We are live here for another 30 minutes, so if you have questions, give us a call at 441-3000. We'll be right back after this break.
This is the Tan Talk Radio Network.
In 1955, the law firm now known as Perenich, Caulfield, Avril, and Noyes made a decision. Instead of taking whatever cases came through their doors, they decided to focus specifically on personal injury. 64 years later, the law firm is one of Clearwater's longest-running personal injury firms. Available 24 hours a day with offices in Clearwater and throughout Tampa Bay, they're ready to put decades of experience to work for you if you or a loved one has been injured in a car accident or injured due to someone's negligence or recklessness. If you feel overwhelmed, uncertain, or unsure about your next steps after being involved in an accident or after a loved one sustained serious injuries due to someone else's negligence, call Perenich, Caulfield, Avril, and Noyes at 727-796-8282 or online at usalaw.com. That's 727-796-8282 or online at usalaw.com. Non-attorney spokesman.
This is the Tan Talk Radio Network.
We are back. This is attorney Matthew Noyes, and I'm here with attorney board certified civil trial attorney Brian Caulfield. We are partners at the law firm of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril, and Noyes. Our firm has been helping people after personal injury matters since 1955. We are the oldest personal injury law firm in Tampa Bay. We have been dedicated to fighting insurance companies, fighting the good fight, to protect those that are injured because of the negligence of others. We kind of talked about what personal injury cases were. Of course, it's automobile. Everybody always remembers automobile accidents, but it's also medical malpractice. It's also slip and falls. It's bicycle accidents, motorcycle accidents. It's just general negligence at somebody's house. That's also a personal injury claim that can be made.
Sure. I mean, and they're more complicated cases that are what you talk about, just regular negligence. In other words, for example, let's say that your shrubbery at the property you own is on a corner and you let that overgrow onto the right-of-way and block motorist visions. That is an example of a case that I actually went to trial on. And one wouldn't think that they could be sued for negligence for not trimming their shrubs perhaps, but indeed the law here in Florida is if you create a dangerous condition and you create a foreseeable zone of risk for someone else and it causes them harm, then that is actionable here in the state of Florida. So certainly the things we hear about the most are auto accidents, trip and fall and slip and fall and medical malpractice and construction accidents. Those are probably, and when I say auto accidents, that encompasses semi trucks, delivery trucks, motorcycles, really kind of any vehicle, mopeds, anything that goes over the road.
Yeah, in addition to personal
golf carts.
Yeah, golf carts. And there's a new law about golf carts too. I think they upped the age or something.
A good idea.
But in addition to personal injury claims, our firm also handles workers' compensation claims, also handles Social Security disability claims. And so if you have questions regarding a work injury, I just had a 5-hour mediation in a work comp case this morning leading into this afternoon. and we're fighting about a doctor's appointment. The workers' comp doctor said he needs to see a carpal tunnel doctor, and workers' comp says, nah, I'm not going to listen to what the doctor says, albeit it's a workers' comp appointed doctor. And instead, we have to fight about it and try to get the injured person, my client, just to see the doctor that ultimately workers' comp chooses anyhow. And so that's workers' comp, and also Social Security disability. We see a lot of people that work really hard all their lives, and then they have a condition that prevents them from going back to work. And so we're happy to fight for their Social Security disability benefits as well. And so if you have any questions regarding personal injury, medical malpractice, workers' compensation, Social Security disability, we're here for about another 25 minutes. And so this is a live legal call-in show. And the number is 727-441-3000. And I often forget to remind our listeners that we are on Facebook too. We're on the firm's Facebook page at Perenich, Caulfield, Avril, and Noyes Injury Lawyers on Facebook, and we are live right now. So if you have a question and you're on Facebook, just type in that question and we'll be here to answer that question as well. And when we're not here from 5 to 6 on every Tuesday, we are always in our office and always online. So Brian, why don't you tell our listeners how they can reach us in our office when it's not 5 to 6 on Tuesday nights or anytime online?
Certainly, you can give us a call. Local number is 727-796-8282. If you have any kind of a question, dealing with the law, if you want to set up a free consultation appointment, that's the number to reach us at, and we'll make it work conveniently for you, whether you meet us in our Clearwater office, St. Pete office, Tampa office, Newport Richey office, or in some cases, it's most convenient for us to come to that person, or to do, take advantage of technology and do the interview over Zoom or a phone consultation.
Right. And sadly, we sometimes have to go to the hospital to meet them.
But, we'll go wherever we need to go in order to give our clients the best service we can possibly give them in the time of need that they have.
Because we have seen that insurance companies, when it's a severe injury, what do insurance companies like to do? They like to go over to them and try to get them to sign the release.
Yeah, it's really kind of an outrageous double standard in Florida law. I mean, lawyers are not allowed, to approach someone and try to solicit their services, get the person to hire them. And they're not even allowed to send a letter for like the first 30 days after the accident, because the person is deemed by the powers that be here in Florida to be in a fragile state. And therefore, that could be a bad thing if they entered into a contract with a lawyer, or so that's what the rationale is. Yet, what's allowed here in Florida is the insurance company can go right to the hospital, and before the client has any legal counsel, while they're laying in bed, while they're on medication, they can go in there and try to get that person to sign a release document offering them a couple $1,000, right now, and then getting them to sign a document that forever releases their claim. And certainly you and I have seen plenty of examples of that, where you see a particular insurance company vehicle that's plastered on the side with the insurance company name, and those people are allowed to go right to the injured person.
Even to the accident scene.
Yeah, and try to get the case settled. And for some reason, the law doesn't recognize that, if they're in a fragile state that should prevent them from meeting and contracting with a lawyer, why aren't they in a fragile state that should prevent them from releasing the claim forever? Because the attorney situation, to the extent someone chooses the wrong attorney and realizes it later, that's not a contract that stays for life.
Right, that can be fixed.
They can simply fire that lawyer and move on. But unfortunately, the release document, if it's drawn correctly, it's over.
Right.
If the person takes an amount of money because they anticipated they were going to be getting out of the hospital, and the next day they run some new tests and they find injuries that are going to keep them in the hospital longer, or they're going to be lifelong injuries that need surgery, they don't get to call back and go, remember that $5,000 I took yesterday? because
here's it back.
we had the mortgage coming due and I felt under pressure. Well, I heard today that I have this problem. Can I please reopen my case? The answer from the insurance company is going to be no.
Right.
And how do I know that? I've handled that very case
Too many times, yeah.
And luckily I have on occasion been able to get the insurance company, based on misrepresentations that were made to the person, I've gotten them to reopen the case.
Right. And that's what we have to prove. We have to prove that they misrepresented what that form that was that they forced them to sign.
Yeah, it's a high standard.
Yes. Well, if you have questions regarding that, please give us a call, 441-3000. It does look like we have Danielle from Clearwater on the line. Danielle, thank you for holding and thank you for listening. How can we help you tonight?
Hi, I'm actually calling regarding my mom. Last year, she was having some issues, and she went to a doctor. They ran a series of tests, and they suspected she may have cancer. Thankfully, they ran the test. She was told that she did not have cancer. But as the months went on, she continued to have problems, and so she saw a different doctor who ran a series of additional tests. And now she has been told she does in fact have cancer.
Oh, goodness.
So what is our ability to sue that first doctor for telling her she didn't have cancer when she did?
That's a very good question. We see that way too often here in the state of Florida. We do have, an elderly community, and we see a lot of situations where they sometimes don't always get the correct information the first time. Brian, you handle a lot of medical malpractice cases. Can you give Danielle a little guidance of what can be done and the acts or bad acts or good acts of Dr. 1 or Dr. 2?
Yeah, Danielle, the important thing is when you have a failure to timely diagnose cancer, obviously, the very first inquiry is whether or not there was malpractice in failure to read the test correctly. In other words, many times, for example, lung cancer or breast cancer, there's a radiological scan that's read by a radiologist. So the first thing we would want to know is when the first doctor said there wasn't any cancer, what was the doctor's basis for that? Did they look at the film and then they said there's no cancer? Well, then, of course, what we're going to do is going to have our experts take a look at that film to determine whether or not that was correct. And if the doctor, and I've had plenty of, failure to diagnose breast cancer and failure to diagnose lung cancer type cases. So when you have the new radiologist that looks at it and says, oh, yeah, there was clearly cancer here, well, then you have the beginnings of a case, okay? Because you have to prove that the doctor breached the prevailing standard of care by failing to diagnose you correctly. But that's not the end of the case, especially in these cancer cases, because the big defense that they have in the cancer cases is what they like to call the so what defense. And that's a very crude,
which is so cold,
very crude and cruel way of saying, so what? We delayed diagnosing the cancer by 6 months or 3 months or 9 months, whatever it is, but we caused no damage to the patient because the patient can't prove that damaged them. And by that, what you need to do is you need to have experts say that, well, more likely than not, you wouldn't have had to have this procedure done, or let's face it, what those cases typically involve is whether or not you're going to be able to beat the cancer. So you're going to want to have an opinion that, but for that delayed read, the patient would have gotten appropriate care and would have made a complete recovery from the cancer and wouldn't have died, versus now they are too late. The stage of the cancer is too late. It's metastasized. It's gone out of a single organ and it's throughout the body. So there's really two steps that a lawyer would look at. Number one, to see what the basis of the failure to diagnose is. But then I would tell you the perhaps even more important question is the answer to the so what question. That is you being able to prove that the delayed diagnosis caused permanent damage or unfortunately caused your mom to ultimately be someone that's going to pass away from this late diagnosed cancer. So those are the things that you're going to want to have the lawyer take a look at. And that's what we do, really every day.
Okay.
Now, was that helpful for you? We're sorry to hear the
Yes, it
situation.
was.
Yeah, and I would tell you to be quick about it too, because you only have 2 years from the date of the malpractice, and that can be extended by something known as a discovery rule. But my point is simply, these cases have a way of getting away from you time-wise. You're so concerned, with your loved one's treatment and recovery that some people don't take action until it's too late. And medical malpractice has the shortest statute of limitations of any type of negligence case in Florida. So therefore, I would encourage you, since you know that there was a misdiagnosis, then I would encourage you to have someone take a look at the case.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Thank you for listening. We wish you the best. It does free a line up. Again, if you have questions regarding personal injury or medical malpractice, workers' compensation, or Social Security disability, give us a call at 441-3000. Just to tag along on that discussion, it doesn't only have to do with cancer. It also can be, hey, I ended up having to have back surgery, and Dr. 2 says Dr. 1 never should have done the first back surgery.
Sure. I mean, there can be many different types of malpractice cases. I've handled cases where people have gone to the emergency room. They've had a fracture to their shoulder, and unfortunately, they were not told about how important it was to follow up quickly. And as a result of the injury being there and not being properly dealt with, the blood flow to the bone, basically the blood flow to that area stopped. And unfortunately, the person ended up needing a complete artificial shoulder as a result of the delay in treatment, because the emergency room doctor didn't properly refer that person on to an orthopedic doctor as an emergency case. And instead just said, yeah, go ahead and make an appointment with a doctor in a couple of weeks. So there's a lot of different types of malpractice out there.
Right.
We tend to try to go backwards and take a look at what is the alleged damage caused as the result of a malpractice case. Because, we've all listened to stories of bad care, so to speak, that makes a family.
Bad practice isn't malpractice.
Yeah, makes a family angry, and the way the doctor treated them, and the story ends with, well, I could have died.
Right.
Well, but fortunately you didn't.
Right.
Unfortunately, that has a effect on whether or not you can bring a case.
Right.
Because ultimately doctors can be negligent, but unless that negligence causes permanent type damage, these cases aren't ones that can economically be brought.
Right.
So there's many cases that there even is malpractice. However, your ability to prosecute that case is very limited, because it would cost you more to get the expert witnesses that you need to go to trial than you'd actually recover in the case.
Right.
So, every case is unique.
Yeah. And I've had cases where somebody injures their back and the orthopedic decides, well, let's do the pain management route or the injections first. And they prove not to be helpful. So they end up having to have surgery 6 months later. And the client says, well, gosh, if only I had the surgery 6 months earlier, then I wouldn't have gone for that 6 months in pain. But just because the doctor doesn't automatically go to surgery doesn't automatically means that he's committed malpractice. It's a judgment decision as well, correct?
Yes, certainly. And it really depends. Well, what's the reason why the doctor didn't immediately go to surgery?
Right.
If it's a herniated disc, well, they're typically not going to go to surgery immediately unless there's some type of major impingement on a nerve. They will, in fact, try to do what we call conservative care and try to give you injections and medications to try to stop swelling. And that's typical in those cases.
Right.
The kind of case where it's like a medical emergency to go right to surgery, those are rare in those type of cases.
So you kind of want the doctor to go different routes before just jumping into surgery. So, but another thing that we see a lot, especially in our practice, is we see those, whether it's online or whether it's even on TV. What's my case worth? and call or click on here to tell you what your case is worth.
Well, yeah.
What do you feel about those things?
Well, I've seen them, and I actually saw one on Facebook, and I decided to click through.
Did you?
Just for grins. And frankly, the questions being asked, there's no way to be able to tell whether or not, what the value of the case is. I mean, first of all, what the value of a case is largely depends on information that it takes time to accumulate.
Right.
In other words, typically when people get involved in accidents, they treat for a period of time and they work towards something known in medicine as maximum medical improvement. That's basically defined as that no lasting improvement to your condition can reasonably be expected. And so, it certainly is premature to try to value a case before a person reaches maximum medical improvement.
There's no way you can say what the future medical bills are going to be.
Absolutely. And if I come to you, 3 weeks after the accident, and I have the emergency room bill of $1,000 and another $600 in medical bills, what does that mean? Does that mean my case is only worth $1,600? Well, of course not.
Right.
But you're certainly premature to know whether or not the case is going to result in permanent injury. And so, unfortunately, that's kind of, I think that's kind of a teaser, so to speak, to develop interest and to try to bring the person in. And they can't even answer the very question that they pose on social media.
I always tell the clients that they ask me, especially in the initial part, what's my case worth? It's like, it would be doing you a disservice if I told you what the case is worth, because there's no way
The correct answer is it's premature to know right now. We need to wait and see when you go through medical treatment.
Gotta see the medical records.
Look, there's testing that needs to be done. What someone thinks their case is about on day 7 after the accident can be way different than what the case actually turns out to be day 30 after the accident, after they've run scans like MRIs, et cetera. So, it's important to be able to sit down with a lawyer that understands that and, is going to be honest and tell you, look, we're going to do everything we can to maximize your recovery. But to be perfectly honest, I can't tell you what your case is worth now. And here's why. Right. It's too premature. Here's the components that go into valuing your case. Here's what the types of damages are we're allowed to make a claim for. And one of those, as you well know, is not just past medical expenses, but future medical expenses. Right. And so if you don't have an opinion from a doctor as to what the client's future medical expenses are, you can't value the case.
No, not at all.
And so you're not going to have that immediately when, you're clicking through to the clickbait, Facebook ads that say, what's your case worth? They're just nonsense, quite frankly.
And people fall for it, and then they ended up not getting somebody who's looking out for their best interest all the time. So what is the best way for somebody who's injured to find a good personal injury attorney? How should they do it? What steps should they take?
Well, one of the things that we have in the information age is Google.
Right.
And, and access. Just type into Google, what's the best way to find an attorney? And they'll tell you to look at things like, how long has the firm been in business? Does it limit its practice to one particular area of the law so that they're experts in that area of law? Does the lawyer have, things like board certification? What's the experience, number of years? Then you can kind of get it down. Obviously, you're going to ask friends and neighbors, but that's not the be all and the end all. You should take the names that they give you and then spend a little time doing your own research. Look at the lawyers' websites as a really good source of information. And then ultimately you can get it down to, your top 2 or 3, and then interview the lawyer. Sure. The same way, if you're offering a job to someone, you're going to interview different applicants before you give someone a job. If you're going to paint your house, you're probably going to try to get 2 or 3 estimates. So you get to meet 2 or 3 different, contractors. It's not unlike that in the law. You certainly want to kind of do your research and not just go to the very first person that's recommended, especially if the person recommending has a particular interest in getting you to go to their friend. That
Right.
is, if it's a doctor and they say, oh, you got to go to my buddy here. Well, you don't know. Just because it's that lawyer's or that doctor's buddy doesn't mean
He's a good
that
lawyer.
lawyer's the best qualified
Right.
to handle your case. And so, it is unfortunate because when people find themselves in an accident, they want immediate answers,
Right.
immediate gratification. They're desperate for answers. And so that can cause you not to do the kind of research you need to do.
And Google reviews, I think, are very important as well. You need to read those Google reviews to see what other clients are saying about those attorneys.
Certainly.
We have many reviews on our website. Our website is usalaw.com, but also voiceoftheinjured.com. We welcome you to look at our reviews because, as the oldest personal injury law firm in Tampa Bay, we really take pride in treating our clients like clients and not like files. Too many people just bring in the person because now it's a file. It's a money generator. And that's what I really was drawn to our firm way back then, was because they always put people first. And you've been doing that for
I'm doing that for 35 years. And it's
so-
still exciting. It's still challenging. It's still fun.
Right.
And certainly it's really gone through a dramatic number of changes. The changes seem to accelerate here over time.
Right. And we do that with lawyers in other areas. If someone says, hey, I need a good probate attorney, then we're one of those sources, but it's the same thing. If we're one of the sources to give a name of a probate attorney, and then they have to do those interviewing and take further steps to figure out which attorney is best for them. Which reminds me, next week, we do have a special guest next week on FLA Law on the radio. She was here a few months ago. Her name is Michelle Perez. She's an immigration attorney. She's a wonderful attorney. She's also a wonderful person. She started her legal career as our receptionist at our firm, and then went on to law school, and now is shining in the immigration law field. So, if you have questions regarding immigration law, stay tuned next week. We'll be here from 5 until 6, again on Tuesday on the WTAN Talk Radio. Brian, why don't you tell our listeners one more time how they can get to us when we're not here in the radio studio?
Well, number one, call us during business hours, 727-796-8282, or visit us on the web at usalaw.com or voiceoftheinjured.com or any of our social media channels.
Yes. So thank you very much. This is Matthew Noyes, and that was Brian Caulfield. We are proud to be available to answer your questions. Listen to us next week as well. But in the meantime, drive safely and watch out for those who don't. Good night.